January 15th, 11 a.m. It began snowing sometime in the night. Hard. We haven't been keeping an eye on the barometer, so it caught us by surprise. We have bundled Taggart in as many spare blankets as we could find and piled more scrap wood on the fire. LeBaron's hands are shaking too much for him to continue with his spark gap transmitter. There's nothing any of us can do today but try and keep warm. Von Arkham's whistling has been upsetting Pascal, so the captain has insisted that he keep quiet. Twice. The wind has picked up as well. We can hear it reverberating off of the Revenant's iron hull. It is becoming more and more difficult for us not to surrender to our agitation and dread. Mickelson was struggling to open a tin of ham earlier, and hurled it against the wall in frustration. Bromberg managed to calm him down, but he's been in a foul mood all morning, and I can't blame him for it. If our luck thus far is to be used as a gauge, this blizzard will take some time to pass. The already diminutive chances of us being spotted have plummeted further. I volunteered to assist LeBaron in completing the spark gap transmitter. He will instruct me on how to proceed, and I shall act as his hands. My hands are steadier than his, and however fruitless the endeavor may be, I refuse to sit idle for another day. January 16th, 3 p.m. Tragedy. We were awakened today by a disquieting sound and immediately noticed that Pascal was gone. Drawing our coats tightly around us, we hurried up the companionway and onto the top deck. The snow and the wind had not subsided, but we could clearly trace the sound off the starboard side. Peering over the rail, we spotted Pascal. He was vigorously, recklessly hacking away at the ice around the Revenant's hull with an axe. He had already opened an aperture of about a meter in width, and the icy water was rapidly seeping through it. The captain called out Pascal's name, but he did not stop hacking at the ice. We flew down the rope ladder and went to confront him, stepping lightly as the water had made the glacier perilously thick. Bromberg put his hand on Pascal's shoulder, but Pascal spun about and brandished the axe at arm's length. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, and his face was bright red from the cold. The poor fellow was in a near frenzied state. He zealously asserted that our only chance of survival was to clear away the ice and set the ship adrift on the ocean, then turned back to continue his delirious hacking. His nerves had finally snapped. Mickelson stepped forward and tried to pull him away from the hole, but Pascal evaded his grasp and swung wildly at us with the axe. One of his wild swings caught Mickelson on the side of the head, rending a deep gash. Our helmsman was dead before he hit the ground, but Pascal's frenzy did not abate. He lunged at LeBaron next, who quickly sidestepped the attack, but lost his footing and slipped into the hole that Pascal had dug through the ice. Before the lunatic could lift his weapon again, Von Arkham dove at him. Literally. Sliding across the ice, he kicked out Pascal's ankles and knocked him from his feet. Pascal scrambled to recover the axe, but I snatched it up before he could touch it. He did not try to stand, but instead began desperately pounding at the ground, trying to break through the ice with his fists, all the while sobbing like a wounded beast. It was painfully evident that our shipmate was beyond all ration. The captain and I shared a glance of mutual understanding, and then he drew his revolver and shot Pascal through the head. Von Arkham pulled LeBaron out of the water, but he froze to death not 20 minutes afterward. We had run out of canvas to sew their bodies in, so we cut up the starboard auxiliary aerostat and laid Mickelson, Pascal, and LeBaron on deck with the other 9. 12 of us now lie cold on the forecastle, not counting poor Bergeron in the engine room. 13 of us dead in a week. God, it feels more like a month. The captain hasn't said a word since he pulled the trigger. He's been at Taggart's bedside for hours now, monitoring his fever and feeding him broth. Thankfully, Von Arkham has been similarly reticent. Perhaps the odd fellow has some decency in him after all. I have spent the afternoon tending the fire in the washing basin and am likely to spend the rest of the day doing so as well. Though I find myself thinking that perhaps it is better that we all freeze to death like LeBaron and slowly succumb to madness like Pascal. January 17th, 5 p.m. Taggart died 30 minutes ago. 14 dead in less than a fortnight. I have never been a superstitious man, but I am now convinced that we are cursed. The curse of the Revenant. We are being punished for our audacity. This damned ship was never meant to fly after its first wreck. The Surger went down off of Nantucket in 15, and we brought it back from the dead. It went down over Denmark last summer, and we brought it back again. We even had the gall to rename it the Revenant. We should have left the wretched bulk at the bottom of Nantucket Sound. Twice we have had the chance to leave it behind, and now it will be our tomb. Things are as silent on board as they were yesterday. In fact, the only words spoken all day have been the captain's eulogy for Taggart. Von Arkham has returned to his cot in steerage, and Bromberg has finally let his guard down about his arm. He's opened his private stash, and the two of us have been drowning our considerable sorrows in scotch and rum, which for the moment we find preferable to drowning them in the Arctic Ocean, though for how much longer I cannot say. January 19th, 6 p.m. A heaven-sent chance of rescue led to tragic ruination today. The snow had finally stopped, and I was on the top deck, clearing the ashes from the basin, when I thought I heard a familiar sound overhead. At first I did not heed it, attributing the noise to the fancies of my exhausted senses and wishful thinking. But it persisted and grew louder and more distinct. An airship's propeller. Looking skyward, I beheld a distant and faintly illuminated shape against the shadowed ether to the south. I practically shrieked down the companionway for Bromberg to come topside. Both he and Von Arkham were on deck in a matter of seconds. The vessel was approximately 3 clicks south of us, flying west by southwestward at 2,000 to 3,000 feet. Our prow floodlight was still lit, but our prow was facing north, so even if someone on the distant vessel would chance to look off of their starboard stern, they would need a telescope to even perceive us as a flickering glow. Sprinting up the steps to the wheelhouse, I pulled the chain to sound the foghorn, but it must have been damaged in the crash because only a muffled croak came out of the damned thing. As I was running back down the stairs from the bridge, I caught sight of the captain rushing into the quarterdeck. A moment later, he re-emerged with the flare gun, which he immediately raised and fired. But his arm... As he lifted the gun over his head, a jolt of pain came over his face. His reflexes got the better of him, and he jerked back his arm just before he pulled the trigger. The flare went off in his face. I do not think I have ever beheld such a horrifying spectacle in my entire life. The captain's beard and hair were ignited like tinder, and in seconds his entire head was engulfed in fire. Douglas Bromberg, my commander of 7 years, whom I have seen pull a bullet out of his own shoulder, gave vent to the most tortured, inhuman howl I have ever heard. I began to remove my coat to smother the flames, but I hadn't even undone half of the buttons when the fire began to spread to his arms and chest. I was just about to throw my coat upon him when he dropped to the deck and began to roll about. Suddenly there was the sound of breaking glass, and the blaze burst forth with swollen intensity. The bottle of rum in the captain's coat pocket had broken. Letting out another horrific cry of agony, Bromberg sprang to his feet and ran, blindly and frantically, into the quarterdeck. Von Arkham and I chased after him, but by the time he had stumbled into his cabin, his burning carcass had already collapsed, and set fire to the cot and the wood-paneled walls. And it is burning still. We could have extinguished it, but Bromberg is dead. flames may serve to attract the attention of another passing ship. However negligible the chances are of that. This is what von Arkham told me, anyway, and I have chosen to agree with him. Perhaps because I believe he is right, or perhaps as a way to assuage my guilt. Because, dear God, the fire that killed my captain is now keeping us comfortably warm. The fire is contained to Bromberg's cabin and will not spread without its wood-paneled walls. It will most likely burn out by morning, and then I am alone now with von Arkham. God only knows how much longer it will be before death seems better company.